Welcome to the Trauma in Our Veins podcast, where we discuss anything and everything we've endured in this chaotic world in which we find ourselves. Everything from parenting to mental health to traumatic events is open for discussion. I'm Maggie.
I'm Erica, and we are making the following promises to you, our listener. Number one, this is a safe space. Number two, goes right along with it, don't be a jerk. Number three, everyone has their opinions and are entitled to them. Number four, pronouns are up to each person to decide, but as a rule, Maggie and I will be using she, her pronouns because that's just how we identify. And number five, no misinformation allowed, opinions and experiences only.
A little recap of last episode.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about religious trauma and we shared some experiences that we personally went through. And then we talked about the deconstruction process and, a few other things that came up. So this time, we're going to talk about more drama in the church. And then we thought it would be good to talk about the man versus bear stuff because
Oh, yeah.
that's really a hot topic right now, and we have a lot to say. So
No, I won't. No. No. I don't think we do that.
no.
Uh,
So yeah, this is gonna be somewhat heavy, I think, just because trauma in the church. Well, first of all, maybe let's explain what trauma is for our dear listeners.
mhm. For
Trauma
those who might
is
not have our expertise in it.
right, right, or because a lot of times when you think trauma, you think of these like really big hardship events, but trauma is any deeply distressing or disturbing event or series of events perceived as a threat to our bodies.
Mm.
There is acute trauma, which is a one-time event, which could be like a natural disaster or a car accident. Um, there's chronic trauma, which is ongoing exposure to very stressful events like an abusive relationship. And then there's complex trauma, when both acute and chronic trauma are happening at the same time. Obviously, there's a lot of different big traumas that we could think of. And that could be something that happens directly to you, or even just witnessing it, like witnessing a crime happening.
Yeah.
And then there's more of the smaller traumas, like emotional neglect and abandonment. However, I just want to, preface that no matter how big or small, trauma is still trauma, and it does really impact your body, physically, mentally, emotionally, everything. And
Yeah. And if I may just quickly, we are using words like big and small. We're not trying to say that anyone's trauma is small as much as it's I don't know. I just don't want to get too close to comparing traumas. That's a dangerous thing.
right. Yeah,
I don't want
that's
to
kind
offend
of what I
anybody
was
by
trying
saying
to.
small trauma where that's not what we mean. It's not what we're trying to say.
No,
Carry
yeah,
on.
nothing. It is not size wise. We'll just put it that way.
Size doesn't
um,
matter, Maggie.
yeah, yeah. Seriously, I think that's the best way to put that. But um, really, the thing about trauma is even if you experience something when you were a child, which many of us have, and we grew up like basically being conditioned to repress that trauma. And so that is held in your body somewhere. And many years later, that will come up. So not dealing with it is just, further impacting your body. And I know for myself and many of my friends, that trauma has shown up as chronic illness, and also mental illness. So it it can also contribute to weight and, your hormones and just the way your body is supposed to function. So, ignoring it or repressing it all those years, like, as you can imagine, like, a lot can happen. And so it's the reason why we want to do this podcast is so that we can talk about it and heal and process the things that have happened to us, but also for our listeners to be able to do the same.
And there is value in speaking your trauma in a public forum like this. A lot of people will look at it, I'm sure, as oh, that's just another podcast to whine, or, whatever, snowflakes. However you want to look at it, that's fine. But I have found value in sharing my story because I have been told by others that they didn't even realize how upset they were not that they didn't realize how upset they were, but they didn't realize how impactful something was until they were in a forum where they were actually open to discuss it. And
Mhm.
me being forthright with what has happened to me in my past, I have witnessed how it's helped other people. So we're trying to do is help ourselves and help anyone else who might. If it's not your cup of tea, that's fine. That's what it is.
Yeah. And that kind of goes into, I'm just going to say trigger warning now, because maybe some things will come up that are triggering to our listeners or even ourselves. And, it's important to be mindful of that and to have that awareness for yourself if you do get easily triggered.
Yeah.
And so this is all going to be about church hurt and, trauma that we experienced in the church because of the church, and maybe even also outside of the church because of people from the church, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And maybe as we share stories, it'll make more sense. But both of us, I can say for both of us, because we've talked about this, but we both grew up in the church and were there,
Mhm.
multiple times a week. We were involved, whether it was the worship team or whatever else we were helping with. A lot of our free time was spent there.
Yeah.
And majority of our friends were from there. It makes sense that a lot of things happened there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, when all your time is spent there, that's where your trauma's going to come from. It's got to come from somewhere.
Mhm. Yeah.
What is I say, whenever I make a mistake in parenting, this is total sidebar. Whenever I make a mistake in parenting, I'm like, well, they got to have something to tell their therapist about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I swear I love my children. I do. Oh,
I mean,
oh my goodness. Anyways.
let's be real. Therapy's good for everybody.
Yes, it
Um,
is. I agree. So one thing that you had said that stuck out to me is that we are conditioned to repress trauma.
yeah.
And that reminded me last time we talked about, the whole pray it away thing and how detrimental that is to your sense
Mhm.
of self if it doesn't work. And
Oh, yeah.
you said conditioned to repress, and I went, oh, ouch.
Ooh, ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
I Yeah, that's one of those things where you're like, "Oh, wow." And it makes you reflect on childhood. And for our
Yeah.
listeners, like, maybe, I don't know, being conditioned is a lot of times out of our control, like, it's happening to us, and
Mhm.
as a child, like, there's no way for us to know that's happening or to even understand how to stop it or,
Mhm.
anything like that. So I don't want anyone to feel guilt or shame about that, because as a child, a lot of the things that are happening to us are out of our control. And whether it's because your parents raised you a certain way or because they didn't raise you a certain way, really either way, like that's happening. And I think, like you were saying, like the whole when you grow up in a Christian home, everything is, read the Bible, pray, God will bless you with many blessings and gifts and
Mhm.
he will give you the desires of your heart if you ask for it and
Oh my
all those
gosh.
things. I mean, hearing that your entire life, and then when you get to a certain point, like as an adult, that's when you seriously are needing some things.
Yeah.
And when you're asking for it and you're getting nothing, no response, or just
Mhm.
nothing's changing, you're
Yep.
like, what the hell? What am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
So,
So that actually brings me to something I had pulled up that because like you said, when we were kids, we had no way of knowing what we were in, and maybe there's somebody listening who, grew up in the church and is in the midst of doubt or deconstruction wherever they may fall. So, there's two things I want to bring up. One, there is religious trauma and then there is spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse is a little more specific, it's a little more one-on-one, but both can happen, both are rampant. But I have a list of questions that
ooh,
you can ask yourself to see if you yourself have signs of spiritual abuse within your life. So it says, has someone ever used or, oh, by the way, this is from therapist.com. I don't know.
ooh,
I
nice.
just, that's how I found it. But has someone ever used or attempted to use my religious beliefs or practices to manipulate me into certain actions? Next, next, am I free to practice my faith at home? Now, before you answer that, your faith, if it differed from your parents' faith, I would qualify.
Mm,
Because,
mm,
as a kid, I would be like, of course I'm free. I'm a Christian. I'm free. It's not the same.
mhm.
Um, okay. Has a parent or partner ever tried to force their religion on me? Hmm. Have my religious leaders ever tried to justify domestic violence or protect known abusers, which is something we dipped a toe into last week? Not that it was a known abuser, but hesitant to ask those questions is something I would tie into that. Has my boss ever limited my ability to work or the opportunity for promotion based on my expressed belief in or disavowal of a certain faith? I will say I did get hired once because I commented that I loved that it was a Christian office and I wanted a Christian space. Got hired for that.
Yeah.
Have my religious leaders ever recommended I stay in an abusive or harmful situation in order to grow closer to my God?
Mm.
And do I have freedom of choice in how I live my life, raise my children, interact with my partner, and so on? Or are those decisions made for me by my religious leaders? So, those are all signs of spiritual abuse. Certainly, I have some experiences that could tie into some of that, but I have less one on one spiritual abuse as I have the religious trauma. So, to talk
Mhm.
about the difference, they are very related, but they are separate. So, spiritual abuse, often the abuser is a religious leader attempting to control or manipulate someone lower in the religious hierarchy, such as a volunteer, community member, or visitor. It may be a parent using religion to abuse a child, or spouse drawing on religious doctrine to assert their right to dominate or control their partner. And religious trauma is, it says it's a systemic experience between a person and their religion as a whole. Often the
Mm.
trauma is not linked to one specific person, but to a series of people over a period of time who enforce a traumatizing message or fail to help when a traumatizing situation takes place. That is something I relate to much more personally myself.
Yes, me as well.
Yeah. Um, but it's interesting that it said that one of the signs of spiritual abuse is uh, have my religious leaders ever recommended I stay in an abusive or harmful situation in order to grow closer to my God? And two things crossed my mind with that. One, yes, because when I wanted to get a divorce from my first husband, it was, driven home by so many people, lovely people on Facebook and some people in my real life, that I should not be doing that and it's against the Bible.
Wow.
But also, in order to grow closer to my God, have you ever had a religious like authority figure tell you, well, why don't you sit in that and see what you can learn from it?
Yeah. But I mean, not always necessarily a relationship, but
Oh
also a
yeah, but like
circumstance too,
your
for
whatever
sure.
it is, that's conviction. Heard that one?
Yes.
Oh, you feel bad? That's
Huh.
conviction.
Oh,
Yeah.
yep.
So anyways, remember when we
Another,
said therapy is a good thing? We all need it.
right? And this is why. No, this is
Mhm.
part of why. Another thing that I found was that church hurt is another good way to describe trauma or abuse in the church or religious, related, because I mean, really, it just depends on, what resonates with you individually. But some examples of trauma in the church, so this is separate from spiritual abuse like you talked about, but
Mhm.
just some examples for our listeners because maybe they haven't had to grow up in that religious environment, or maybe they have and may not even realize that some of this was happening while they were, going to church.
Right. So the list that Maggie's about
Mhm.
to give is basically what we were describing as the systemic experiences and the reinforcing traumatizing messages is what we're gearing at now.
Yes. So dismissing sin and demanding people to forgive and forget. So
Oh,
this
ouch.
this one really hit hard for me because so basically a personal example of this would be when someone does to you in the church environment, and this could be manipulation, could be sexual assault, it could be abuse, rumors, or shaming.
Ooh, the
When you
rumors.
have yeah, actual evidence of someone doing something to you, or it just happens, and you go to a leader or someone you trust in the church and tell them what happened and say, hey, this wasn't right, or this made me uncomfortable, or this bad thing just happened and I don't know what to do about it. And you go to that person trusting that they have your back and that they're going to take care of you and like take care of the situation, and they totally just dismiss it, or they turn that shame on you, and say, well, you should have gotten yourself out of that, or should have said no, or whatever it is. Like,
It's
um,
lighting.
e- exactly. And so dismissing what someone clearly has done wrong and basically telling you that you need to forgive them still. Um, and that mentality of, oh, forgive the sinner, like hate the sin, love the sinner. Like I remember hearing that a lot.
Mm. Oh yeah.
That and this is just the first one. So next one would be spiritual shaming. So using the Bible to twist and interpret verses so that somebody feels ashamed for what they have done or said. And boy, do a lot of Christian, I hate to like stereotype or categorize people, but
Isn't that kind of
for
what we're doing
me,
though?
yes. But well, for me, it was, Christian people that did this the
Mhm.
most, not only to me, but witnessing it happening to friends of mine. And it is just wrong. Next one, you're not praying hard enough, which, we touched on before. You should have more faith, or you're being too sinful. You need to repent. If you read the
Mm.
Bible and pray every day, you're a good Christian.
Or
So,
my favorite one in that category was maybe God's trying to reveal a sin that you're not aware of.
oh
That
yeah,
was so damaging because then that set me off for the rest of my life to think I was wrong for the rest of my life. Anyways, carry
yeah,
on.
yeah. Dismissing pain and ignoring the grief process. Pain still exists whether we follow God or not, and it having that mentality or forcing that mentality makes people think that God is displeased with us when bad things happen. And in reality, like if this could be like a death in the family or, losing someone close to you, like that's not just something you can, you know, pray away or like, oh, like, God wanted this to happen, so I'm just gonna, not grieve or deal with the pain and I'm not gonna let myself be sad. Like,
Mm.
I feel like that's kind of enforced in some churches where, you're not really allowed to go through the grieving process. It's looked at differently from a religious perspective.
Yeah, either you're
Um,
not allowed to go through it or you're expected to go through it at a certain pace,
yeah, quicker
which
because
damaged the hell out of my sister. Her daughter passed away and she felt guilty for still mourning after a year. I was like, "Are you in No. You mourn for as
yeah,
long," and I told it, I was like, "You mourn for as long and however you need to. No one can tell you the right way to go through this."
yeah, and when it comes to grief is always going to be there. I mean, it can be a year, it can be 20 years. Like it can still be there. And even if you've gone through, all the stages of grief and you've reached that
Mhm.
acceptance point, there will still be times where you are triggered or something makes you sad or you're reminded of the person you lost and like all those feelings rush back. I mean, that's
Mm.
a natural human thing. And so for the church to dismiss that or make you feel like you shouldn't be feeling that way, like that's just messed up.
Yeah.
Okay, so other thing, which I have a feeling you're going to really relate to this one, but expecting superhuman leadership and families in the church. So, like, for instance, the pastor or the preacher, like, they're on call 24/7, and they're expected to be at every single event, whether it's
Mm.
hospital visit, a funeral, a wedding, or the community, even. Like, there's a lot of expectations that we put on the leaders and I think accountability wise, yes, that should be a thing. But when it comes to this other stuff, it's like now you're expecting this person to like not be with their families 24/7. And
Yeah.
that's why so many pastors have burnout and leave the church.
Yeah, that was my dad when we moved to Florida. I remember asking him at one point later in life why he didn't look for a pastoral job or if he did but didn't find one or what. He said, "No, absolutely not." He said, he was a pastor at that church for 11 years, and by the time he left, he was like, I don't wanna put words in his mouth, but the way his face looked was like, "You guys were about to push me away from God." Like, I don't think he would have seriously said that or thought that, but that was just the look on his face was just, "All y'all motherfuckers need to get away from me
Yeah.
before I send you to meet him." Like, he he was very hurt by a lot of things that went on. I don't know very many specifics, but I know that he got a lot of criticism. There were, I mean, first of all, we lived in Connecticut, so that's one thing. Stepford Wives is their whole life. But
Mm,
I'm getting distracted again. No, yes, totally get it. And they did expect absolutely superhuman, perfect things from him, and it was stressful. And I can see how that stress reflected in his parenting to us because all he was trying to do was hold it together, and all we were trying to do was be kids and that
yeah.
was not the two cannot coexist in that scenario when the congregation is expecting perfect.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah.
Um,
I feel bad for him in
next,
that in looking at that, it's just painful.
yeah. Well, and maybe, one day you'll be able to have that conversation with him to get to hear more of his experience, and maybe you might be the one that helps him through that or, helps him process that. I mean, you never know.
Yeah. Again, see, this is how sharing trauma can be helpful. This is what we're talking about.
Yes. So,
What's next?
one definitely both of us will totally get triggered by.
Oh
Um,
no.
so dramatic scare tactics about hell and heaven. So creating more fear than faith, especially for children. And it's like the teachings of how God is jealous or wrathful, or, some of the more angry side versions of him in the Old Testament. A lot of that was used, I feel like, at least for me, eh, almost to scare you into not wanting to go to hell, so you have to do whatever it takes to go to heaven.
I wonder how many
And
times in the Bible it says to fear God, because it definitely does.
it does, but, like we mentioned,
See.
we may have said this the last episode, the Bible has been translated through many languages, and the first ones being Aramaic and Hebrew. So I don't know anyone that can speak either of those. And my point being is, if that's how it started, who knows when it went through all these other languages if
Mhm.
the fear God is really what it said.
And
We have no idea.
Google says you do not have to look hard to find the fear of God mentioned in the Bible. In fact, some form of that phrase can be found over 300 times throughout the book. Fearing God is an
Oh my
important part
goodness.
of knowing God. That's from
Wow.
Google.
I
Wow.
I just like anything, having there is such thing as a healthy dose of fear. However, I think in, this aspect, it's like if you, especially for children, if you are basically making those kids afraid of, hell, and describing in a way that sounds like a fucking nightmare. I mean,
Mhm.
what do you
Where there shall
expect?
be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Yeah, and all this other shit too. This sounds horrible. And it's like, the thing is, it's like, yeah, that the fear of God might be mentioned in the Bible, which still, we really don't know if that's the original translation, if that's what, was meant for it, or
Mhm.
if that is a tactic in itself. However, that's why I feel like there's children Bibles, and then there's adult Bibles.
Mm.
Children should
Like the
not be.
children's versions. Did you read the children's
Yeah.
versions of the Left Behind books?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Oh
Which
my goodness.
those are still
They
those
were
are
still
still
pretty
traumatic.
intense. Yeah, they were
Yeah.
still pretty intense. The movies too.
Yes. And
Mhm.
I remember seeing that as a young kid, and that shit terrified me because it made me afraid to go on planes. It affected a lot of things for me, and even there was legit a time when I thought the rapture happened and I thought I was
Yeah.
left behind.
Mhm.
Like,
That mm.
yeah, and I know you've experienced this too, but
My
I,
anxiety is so bad if my parents don't answer the phone for long enough, I got worried.
yeah. Well,
But,
and for a
I
while we didn't
before
have
we,
phones.
yeah. Sorry, I keep talking over you, I'm so sorry. Before we move past the scariness, I would like to ask, how old were you when you watched The Passion of the Christ?
Oh, let's see. What year did that come out? Because it was
2001.
the year. Okay, yeah, it was the year it came out. So
My
definitely,
I was 10 years old, my cousin Matt was 10 years old, and my mom brought us to the theater.
um, my parents saw it first in theater, and then they thought it was a good idea to take
Oh yeah,
us out.
same. Yep. Oh, sorry, it was 2004. We were 13,
Oh,
not 10, but still
California?
that's not better. It's not much better.
No.
I
Uh,
swear, I certainly felt like a 10-year-old. I did not feel like a teenager.
I think I was 10 as well, because that would be what, 20 years ago? Yeah,
Yeah,
math.
2004, yeah. Math and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. So, yeah, definitely way too young for that. And Left Behind, it was even younger than that.
Mm.
Um, I was probably like in first grade, maybe. So it just, and I remember like my parents read the books out loud to all of us because we had devotional time and reading book time, and we were like forced to sit down and listen to this stuff as kids. And yeah, it definitely is a root cause of a lot of anxiety for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah,
What
there
was
was
what was the thing we did at Halloween in the early thousands when they would like invite people to the church and then we only did this once. They put on a huge show about hell and it was like trying to scare people. Literally that was the point,
oh,
was to
the
try to
gates
scare
of hell or
people.
something. Was it the gates of hell?
Heaven's gates or hell's flames.
Yeah, that. Oh my
Oh
gosh.
my
Yeah, I remember that.
gosh. Oh my god, I
Oh,
can't. And this was
I
I
remember
was
that.
again, I was 14 when we did this and I was involved in it. Like,
Oh,
it's so messed up.
yeah, and they sold tickets for that, so people had to like
Mhm.
pay to see it, I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
And we were all expected to invite and bring a certain number of people.
Yeah, that shit was intense. And
Yeah.
I don't understand, like, they're definitely just like how, any other rated R movie would be unacceptable. Like, I wasn't allowed to watch so many things based on, if it had violence in it, nudity, whatever. And music. I also like could only listen to Christian music. And but the thing is like they were okay with showing me Passion of the Christ, Left Behind, as long as
Mhm.
it had a Christian flair to it or whatever, like it was
Right?
fine.
Then
So,
it was appropriate, obviously, right?
right, right.
My goodness.
So,
With that, just again, I keep saying real quick, I need to stop apologizing for everything that I say. With the whole hell thing, for anybody who's listening who has had this anxiety and fear of hell for like ever and hears random screaming voices in their head, it's not real. It's not real. And I did not realize how not real until last year, which is what just lit the match on my deconstruction, was a conversation that I had wherein I was told that theologians have been debating the existence and the reality of hell for thousands of years. And this information came from the person who I was the one who told me it was real. So it was just, it's not real. Don't listen. It's not real. It's a threat.
well, and
That's
if you are still like if you still do have faith, I just want to preface like if you do have faith and you do believe heaven and hell is real, that's fine too. But I do want to say that whatever version that you have been fed your whole life, it is not really what that is. So
it's
like
probably not that. Like,
exactly. So and I think the whole point too, I mean, well, this gets on a whole different topic, so we'll wait on that. And because there's actually more to this list of trauma in the church, and they
I
are
understand.
ridiculous.
We'll do a whole episode on fear tactics in the church. That'll be later.
Yeah, well, it deserves its own, or at
Yeah.
least. So, okay, this next one, which you kind of touched on with the spiritual abuse, but this can also happen systematically too, but insisting on marriage above all else. and ignoring abusive behaviors. Divorce is looked down upon. There's that pressure to stay together. And my favorite, women need to submit to their man.
Yeah.
Ooh, I don't know how many times I heard that, but boy, that was yikes.
Anyone. Golly.
Yeah, it's just disturbing how,
It's also unrealistic.
yeah,
Like, because I'm sorry, I have been in a few relationships, 2 marriages. I feel like I can say this. The men are not in those scenarios leading. So, like, how what are we submitting
yeah,
to? What
yeah,
I can't
exactly.
submit to nothing. Sorry,
Right.
that sounds dangerously close to, encouraging toxic masculinity, and that's not what I mean by it. I just mean, like, I can't remember a time when I haven't been in charge. I
Yeah,
that's
whether
just
it's the
whether it's just
e
because women naturally take charge or what, I don't know, but I have always been in charge.
I think partially because for many women, we are gifted with more of, like, the organizational skills, the planning, the, uh, keeping everyone together and, like, on a structured plan. I
Yeah,
think there's just certain things that we tend to take over because we might be better at it. And that may not be every case for every couple, and
yeah, that's true.
I think I think we ultimately are attracted to the opposite, or like whatever we need to balance out like where our strengths and weaknesses are. So I think that's why the whole submission thing is just bullshit, because it takes
Yeah,
two people to tango and it takes two people to make a marriage work. So
yeah.
I don't want to hear it.
Listen, we
So
told you
yeah.
last episode, Erica is salty as hell. I love my husband. He's a wonderful man. I love a lot of very I love a lot of very wonderful men. That sounded weird. I have a lot of very good men, examples of men in my life.
Yes, me
But it
too.
wasn't always that
And
way.
no, and there's definitely some bad examples too.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, oh, this one is definitely true too, for that I've experienced just, in the last few years actually. But that loss of community when you leave a church.
Mm.
So, I mean, I mentioned in the last episode that I haven't really been going to church since before the pandemic. Have I heard from any of those people? No, not once. So, I mean,
Mm-mm.
but when you
Out of
show
sight, out of
up,
mind.
to church, they put on that face, they tell you you're welcome, they, act like you're a family, which is all nice and dandy, but it's the moment you leave or you stop showing up, do they take notice, or do they check on you? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't
Now,
experienced that.
I have. But eh, I also take pause with that just because there's a factor of there's a lot of factors. It goes both ways. And you know how it is when your life is moving and you're especially think of our college days, how young we all were and how much we all had on our plates. And people had relationships that they were getting into. Everybody was ring by spring. Everybody's trying to start their lives and start their families. So, yes, I agree that it sucked when I left churches and was not followed up with by the church. But I removed myself from that church and that situation. So, expecting them to have the capacity to follow me is, in my mind, something that was a little selfish in my experience. I don't know if everybody is that way. That was just my own experience. That I, looking back at it, was selfishly kind of hiding myself in order to see who came looking. And that was something I needed to work on that was rooted deep, deep, deep in childhood. But I have to have a little bit of understanding on both sides of that equation.
No, yeah, I get that, and you're right. I mean, not every situation is gonna be like that. Like, if you are removing yourself, like, you might not want any contact
Yeah.
or connection with those people, and I totally get that. I think it's just for some people, because 'cause I've read stories, not my story or yours, but, like, uh, where they left because of, you know, a specific reason, and they definitely were expecting some
Follow up.
people to stay in touch, or, like, they acted like they were best friends while they were going to church, but then they left because of, some reason, and then don't hear anything, and
Yeah.
I know some people might expect that more than others,
Mm.
essentially.
Depends
So
on your
the
situation and how close you were to the people who were there. That's like you said, it's everybody's situation is different.
Yeah. Oh, so the next one, which I'm sure a lot of people can be like, "What the fuck?" So shame and guilt towards sex before marriage, that's a big one. Um,
Mm.
Also towards the LGBTQA community,
Mhm.
abortion, assault, and mental health. I feel like there's a lot of shame and guilt, really wrapped up in all those different areas, and
Mhm.
if someone's experiencing one of those things and they are going to the church and they like are open about those things, like it can definitely have a backfire sensation, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a good way
so
to put it.
it's yeah, like it's hard. I mean, that it's vulnerable to do that, and then to basically be told that you're a sinner or you're wrong, or God wouldn't approve of that. Like, it's just very toxic, and
Yeah.
it destroys people's self-esteem and their identity. So, and like they're really with mental health, like just from my own personal experience and like dealing with a family member that was extremely mentally ill. And this is when my family and I were still very heavily like going to church, and I was still pretty involved in stuff. And when one of my siblings started experiencing psychosis and some other things, like just the stigma that was there, and like, I don't know, just how people looked at him differently and treated him differently.
Yeah.
And it just like looking back, it's like, oh my God, I just why did we put up with that? And like sex before marriage, I mean, that one's definitely huge too, because
Mhm.
I had to go through like a purity class with like
Oh
just
god.
girls, and yeah, and
You get a ring at the
there
end?
are well, we could have ordered
Oh.
one, but I
Mhm.
didn't. For me, like, I left with more questions than answers for that class, and it just made me feel shame and
Yeah.
guilt, anything sexual related, or even kissing, like, all of that shit. And,
Mhm.
I definitely wish that would have been handled differently, or honestly wish they would have done more of a sex educational class rather than
Mhm.
do not
I w
do this. This is wrong.
We had a sex ed class at my school, but I wasn't allowed to sit in it. I had to just walk out of the room and leave while they had class.
Oh,
I'm not even kidding, my parents wrote a note to the school.
oh my God.
And then when I
Yeah.
did lose my virginity, I when my mom found out, she did not speak to me for 2 weeks, which she still denies to this day, but up till then, we spoke daily, and then when I talked to my dad during those 2 weeks and was like, "Yeah, I was gonna call mom, but I don't think she really wants to hear from me," and he goes, "Yeah, well, you're probably right."
Oh my God.
Mhm. So, yeah, talk about trauma.
Yeah.
My mom was my
That's
best friend my whole life. And she still is. Like, we're very close, but it's just not the same now probably, but we're still very close. That
Yeah,
was a one-time kind of instance. I think that was the only time that she and I have ever argued or like disagreed, I guess. Not disagreed, but clashed.
this is also a real thing for me too. When my parents found out that David and I were having sex, they definitely pressured us to get married. And
Mm.
not saying that's the only reason we got married when we did. Like, look, guys, I was 20 years old. I understand that that's young. Um, but not that I mean, I'm not trying to like brag here or anything, but my emotional intelligence has always been extremely high, and that
Yeah.
has really matured me for my age. And so even at 20, like I didn't feel like I was that too young at the time. And looking
Yeah.
back, like, yeah, I probably could have waited to get married, sure. But we've also been together for 10 years, and I don't ever see us getting divorced. Like,
We love
I
David.
knew I made, yeah, I know I made the right decision. So I don't want anyone to
Yes.
think differently when I share this, but just that my parents definitely pressured us to get married to the point where they were even encouraging us to elope because
Mm.
they said if you're having sex before being married, like that is sinful. God wouldn't approve of that. And,
Mhm.
blah, blah, blah. You need to get
We'd
married
rather
in
not
church.
be able
And
we'd rather not be able to attend your wedding than you have sex before you getting married. Oh my god.
yeah, basically, they were concerned for whether
Your
or not we
souls.
would go to heaven or hell. Like, that's what it comes down to. And and they did want us to elope, but when I said no, like we're not going to elope, then like it became, well, then you have to get married in a church because that's where God is present, and whatever. It's like, oh really? I thought he was everywhere.
What would have happened if you would have eloped? God wouldn't have come?
I guess so. Like, it was very contradictory, and
Oh, God
that
can't go to
that was
Vegas. God
that
can't go
was
to
when I
Vegas.
right, he can't. It's well, no, my parents believe it's like Sin City there, so they don't. Yeah, they believe that, and
Oh my goodness.
which is just whatever. But
Yep.
that was the first time, like, when it really hit me, because like I started deconstructing and having doubts when I was in college. So yeah, around that like 19, 20 years old stage is when it really started. And that was the first time when I was just like, wow, my parents really contradict themselves all the time. And I started like reflecting, back over the years. And I was just like, what the fuck? No wonder why I constantly second guess myself. No wonder
Right.
why I don't know how to trust like my gut or my instinct, because they always have made me question everything because they literally contradict themselves all the time. And
Mhm.
it really confused the hell out of me. So, yeah, that was definitely one of those times. And like, granted, we did get married, and not because of what my parents said or anything like that, but just having that pressure, it
Yeah.
definitely added to the stress of
Yeah.
our wedding.
No, absolutely. My Tim and I also felt rushed by not even a conversation or anything like that, but just the sheer knowledge of the fact that if I, for whatever reason, ended up pregnant and we weren't married yet, that it would be a whole thing and it would be a whole guilt thing and it would be a whole shame thing. And we were so desperate. I was so desperate to avoid that, and he was so desperate to help me be happy because he didn't understand why I was so desperate to avoid that. Like, it was a whole thing, and again, it's not that we still were 2 years into our relationship when we got married. It wasn't like we rushed into anything in that sense, and we had known each other for a year before that, but it was just there was that outside pressure, that external source of guilt that why is that something that I took onto my own shoulders? Because in all reality, the worst they could do is look at me and think thoughts or say words, but what are you going to do? It's done.
Mhm.
So the attitude
Yeah.
that I have now is so much healthier because for my whole life, I lived in fear of that guilt, of that shame because of all of those things, because of the fear of hell and the, you know, sex before marriage is wrong to the point where I didn't even date until college. I did not go on my first date until the end of freshman year. And it just wasn't a part of my life. I kept it at an arm's length. Anyways, that's my other tangent.
Yeah. No worries. I this next one, I feel like is pretty obvious, and I'm sure we both have experienced this, but emotional manipulation. I I just I think that that is commonly happening in the churches today even,
Yeah.
and people just don't even realize it. So, and I think a lot of that is even that idea of, because I remember being told, don't listen to your heart. Like you have to listen to God. So your
Mhm.
heart and your mind will lie to you, and so you can't listen to that. Like you have to just listen to God. And
Yeah.
that was that first thing of your instincts, don't listen to those. Those aren't
Yeah.
real.
Yeah, and it's
And
externalizing your sense of self, and that is so dangerous.
yeah, really. And even like, as teenagers, obviously we have big feelings. I mean, these are some of the most important parts of developing and becoming an individual. And I feel like a lot of times the people in the church can often stunt that growth and stunt people like developmentally because they don't want you to feel the way you feel. They tell you that, certain thoughts or feelings you're having are sinful, are wrong, when in reality, it's human nature and curiosity. And those are things that should not be shamed for,
Yeah.
exploring and stuff. So,
They need to be
that can,
encouraged for developmental purposes because think about it. Think about a bird. They literally push their
mhm.
baby out of the nest and be like, "All right, figure it out."
Yeah, yeah.
Saying that
And
like we should do that to babies, but I'm saying like you need that structure of trusting yourself.
mhm. and and to know that you're allowed to go out and make your own mistakes and learn things, and then to know that you have support when that happens. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what's beautiful, and that's how it should be. But I feel like, for me at least, growing up in that Christian home, my parents were very much like, "Oh, I'm disappointed in you." And, it was always like this negative thing or punishment that would follow the mistake I made. When it's like, I just needed them to love me and support me through it. Like, that's all
Yeah.
I needed.
Yeah.
So, and that just goes into the whole thing, which will probably be its own episode, like not having your needs met as a child and what that does to you.
Yeah.
So,
I should have my mother-in-law as a guest on that one. He She was the mom to
yeah.
her younger siblings, in a lot of ways. Her mom was there,
Oh,
and that's a
yeah.
whole like, I love her mom. That's not
Right. So, next one, an adolescent expressing their thoughts or feelings is then physically disciplined or beaten into submission by a parent or a religious leader to save their soul. I think we've all seen examples of that, like, especially, I think, from the Catholic perspective on TV shows and movies and stuff. But I mean, this shit really does happen. And do also want to mention that it may not always necessarily be physical discipline or beaten, like it could be emotional or using like that guilt and shame to make your child, submit. So that's
That
also a
was
thing.
100% my childhood. We got
Mhm.
wooden spoons, we got belts, we got bare hands to bare bottoms
Mhm.
until I think my last spanking, I guess, was at 10. And I think the
Yeah.
reason it was the last one is because I refused to cry. So I think my dad was just like, "Oh, I guess this doesn't work anymore." So,
We
but I
gotta
was
tell
also a
something
pretty good
else.
kid, so it wasn't too bad for me. It was worse for my older sister. She was very much anytime she voiced an opinion that differed, she was put in her place. And I can see how that impacted her and the relationships that she accepted later in life. And my dad did too. Eventually he came to all three of us daughters and apologized to us, said I clearly did something very wrong and I'm going to figure out what it was and I'm going to work on it, and he has. And he is not the same person today that he was then.
I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But
He has a lot of love in his heart, and I feel like he has just gotten lost in the church because, and
mhm.
that's just me being, the kid thinking they're smarter than the parent or whatever, and I love my dad and just but I don't think he's ever going to be out of the church, and that's fine, and it is what it is.
Some people are more set in their ways when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But it's really cool that he acknowledged what he did and apologized for it. I think a lot of adults, like our parents' age and older, really struggle with that,
yeah.
because it's just not what their generation does. Like, it's
That's not
just
what they were
not
taught.
the right. They weren't taught, and so it's not the norm.
Yeah.
And so that's really cool.
Shout out, Dad,
Yeah,
you're
that
awesome. God, I hope he's not listening.
well, and like my parents, also did the spanking and things like that too till I was 10 because I started going through puberty at 10. So they're like, "All right, yeah, we can't do this anymore." Um, but like they still make comments to this day like how they wouldn't change it because they think that that's what kids need, like, even today and stuff, like, they are like, "I don't understand, like, if now, like, you can get arrested for that," and I'm like,
But it doesn't
"Well,
matter because spare the rod, spoil
yeah,
the child, and foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction will drive it far from him.
yep,
These are the tropes that are just burned into my brain.
yeah." Oh, and that's
And that's heartbreaking for me looking at my kids because I'm not saying that I don't discipline my children, I do, but I don't take a belt to their behind. If they're doing something dangerous, I absolutely will smack a hand. I'll smack a butt cheek for Haley because she's little and that's soft, so it doesn't hurt her. And and
mhm,
and by smack, I mean like you can't even hear
what?
it, like that.
Yeah,
And it hurts me to think of looking at my kids and having them tell me how they feel about the situation, and me looking back and saying, "You're wrong." And that honestly leads right into the man v. bear thing because what it boils down to is men, you don't get to tell women that they're wrong on an opinion based question. And
yes,
I can't imagine looking at my children and them offering their heart up to me in their little hands and me knocking it down and saying it's wrong, start over. Like, how painful is that? Like that, I'm gonna start crying if I'm not careful because
well,
that's genuinely what the whole relationship God to me feels like in my whole life. So and supposedly he's supposed to be God the Father, and I just can't imagine doing that to my children. I'm sorry.
yeah, yeah, that this is what happens, people. This
Uh
is the
huh.
shit that can happen, and,
You get
um,
crazy
it's
bitches like me.
no, but the fact that you're you're even saying that though just shows a lot of who you are and who you are as a parent too. So I just want you to know that you're doing great. And
Mm.
I don't think your kids are going to have the same experience that you did
Yeah.
because you know what it did to you and you're doing better because of it. Like you're doing better for them because of it. And so I really don't think they'll have, the same experience. And
They
I think
certainly
it's
won't
going to be
have
better.
they certainly won't have the same experience. That I'm not perfect. I absolutely lose my temper. We've talked about this.
Yeah.
But I go back to my kids afterwards. If I let anything out to them or in front of them, I go back to them afterwards. I explain, what I did wrong, apologize, and I do ask for forgiveness from my kids, but I don't tell them that they have to do it.
Yeah.
But it's all about building just a better foundation. It's not a perfect foundation, but it's a better foundation.
Well, but yeah, that's just what I mean. Like, that's huge of you to acknowledge it and to apologize. And
Yeah.
you are owning up to what you did, even though the reason why you do what you do is out of your control a lot of the times. I mean, you
Yeah.
think of like all the stuff you've been through and the mental hardships you're currently dealing with because of a lot of that stuff. So yeah, you might lose your temper every now and then, but I mean, who the fuck is perfect, And none of us are.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Woo.
Uh, but yeah, I wanted to say that quick.
Well, I appreciate that. I love you too.
But yes, when you brought up Man vs. Bear, that really perfectly leads us into that. So, your listeners, bear with us. Okay.
Oh
Um,
no.
sorry.
No.
Um, I know.
Oh,
Yeah. So, obviously, if most of you haven't already heard what this debate is, I mean, it's not even really a debate. It's just a simple question. And I believe it was asked like, what was it, 11 people or 8 people, something like
I
that?
have no idea how many people, but even thinking about just the sheer volume of people who have chimed in on TikTok alone, I mean, you're at thousands now.
Yeah,
Original
I
interview,
just
I don't know.
saw,
It was like a dozen girls or something. I don't know.
and it said in one TikTok video, which has been viewed more than 16.7 million times, an interviewer asks 8 women on the street whether they'd be stuck in a forest with a man or a bear. And 7 out of the 8, with little hesitation, said the latter. And it is stirring up all over on social media. And we thought it was, I mean, it's a very interesting topic. And I'm kind of glad this happened because I think it's something that we need to talk about more. And
Yes.
um,
The
I know,
response from the not the general populace of men, but a certain subset of men has been jarring. I have seen reactions from how stupid are you that you want to be alone with a bear to okay, go fuck a bear then to memes that people have drawn of women being mutilated by bears because they chose the bear. And all y'all who are doing those things need to understand that you are why we're choosing the bear.
you're part of the problem.
Yeah, big
um,
part of the problem.
yeah. Ugh. Yeah, I
So,
The
Maybe we
fact
didn't have as
that
much to say about this as we thought.
well, no, the fact that people are getting uppity or upset with it, I know a lot of men are, like, "What the fuck? What does this mean?" And there's been all these memes and jokes made out of it, and I just, like, the fact that that's already happening just also proves this is why women
We
would choose a
choose
bear because
the bear.
they know we know what to expect with a bear. We know what the dangers are. But
Exactly.
and for the most part, we know how to survive the encounter. I mean, sure there are some incidents where that's not the case, sure. But when it comes to men, the fact that we don't know what the dangers are when it's like being alone with a man, I mean, obviously, outside of our husbands and things, or significant others, but I
Sometimes. Not
right,
yours and mine, but
sometimes.
sometimes. Let's be real with the statistics.
It's
It's more likely for a woman to be assaulted by a man she knows than a stranger.
mhm,
And that should be enough to shut down the argument, in my opinion, because you're talking these I've seen men saying stuff like, but if you're more likely to get attacked by someone you know than a stranger, then why would you mind running into a strange man in the woods?
oof.
Anyways, sorry again, interrupted.
No, you're fine. Um, well, one of the answers from one of the 8, I believe, that were interviewed said, "Bear, because if I got attacked by a bear, people would believe me." And that broke me. It was
Mhm.
like, "Oh my god, if that isn't reason enough." Like,
Yeah. I saw a post that said a bear or nobody would ask me what I was wearing when the bear attacked me. Nobody would ask if I secretly liked it when the bear attacked me. Stuff like that too, and it's just like it's so true.
oh my goodness.
And
Wow.
this is what a lot of good men don't understand because they can't fathom the things that the bad men fathom and exhibit. And the good men are like, but we're not all bad. I don't understand. We're not all bad. And it's like, yeah, you're right. You're not all bad. But let's go with the statistics again. Let's go with the odds. There's a creator on TikTok named Dad Chats who is a lawyer and does 2 videos about this that I encourage you all to go and watch because he lays out the numbers. And when I say he lays out the numbers, he does all of the math trying to get these men to understand the probability and the almost positivity of if you encounter a man, the odds are he's got some thoughts in his head about you that you do not want to know, and he might tell you. So it's all about them
Mhm.
numbers, babe.
Yeah, I mean, how would we know?
Yeah.
I asked the good ones, how would we know you're a good one? Like, how can we truly know that right off the bat? I mean, look at all the crazy stuff that happens in the world today. Like, you cannot sit here and tell me that I can trust anyone that that wouldn't happen. Because, like you said, the numbers show differently. So,
Hmm. And the men who are
yeah.
going to do those things to you don't come up to you and say, "Hey, I'm going to do these things to you." They say the same things as the good men because they've been watching them. So they know how to play it until you're stuck. And then they flip the switch, flip the script.
Hmm.
So I'm so glad that I'm
So,
not
yeah,
dating.
I know. I was gonna say, like, yeah, I'd take my chances with the bear too.
Mhm. I have
But
told Tim
yeah,
if he kicks it, I'm done. If he kicks it or quits, whatever the case may be, I'm done. I'm not going back out there. I'll go
yeah,
to the woods. I'll go
I
find a bear.
I will be yeah. I said that I would just adopt a bunch of animals because
Mm.
I wouldn't be able to find somebody else because it just, and I'm so sorry to my friends that are listening that are single. Like, I have so much
Oh.
empathy for you for having to date in this world. So you
Oof.
are all so brave, and I wish
And please
you
be
all
safe.
the luck. And yes, please be safe. And if it comes down to it, look for a bear instead. Just kidding.
I
Just
will say
kidding.
the funniest response that I have seen, the funniest meme response that I have seen come out of this was a picture of a bear and a man hugging, and it was the bear choosing the man after like 30 minutes with the woman or something like that. That was hilarious.
Yeah, okay,
Because you know what? I get it. I'm a little crazy. I get it.
that's funny.
Oh my word.
Well, thank you to all of our listeners for bearing with us. I swear
Stop
I'm
it.
not trying to do that on purpose. I swear. Um,
Do you
but
swear
just,
by the bear?
for yes, I swear on the bear that I'm not trying to make bear puns. Okay, but thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy this episode, and we will definitely be back for more. So,
Absolutely. And once again, may Loki be with you
may Loki be with you all.
instead of the bear. Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye.